They laughed when he entered the cafe. Not a quiet, nervous laugh, the kind that slips out by accident, but an open, cruel one that echoed across the room. His jacket was faded, his shoes were scuffed, and his jeans looked like they had seen better decades. The scent of rain clung to him, the way it does to someone who walks, not drives, through a storm. But what stood out most wasn't his clothes. It was the calm on his face, a kind of stillness that did not belong to the poor. It belonged to people who had already seen everything and lost nothing by being misunderstood. Imagine standing there, surrounded by whispers and smirks, holding your dignity like a fragile piece of glass. Every step he took through that cafe floor felt heavier, not because of shame, but because of memory, the kind that carries you through storms others never see. He ordered a simple black coffee, handed over a wrinkled bill, and sat at the far corner, near the window. The laughter continued behind him. A group of young men in expensive jackets, designers, influencers, the kind of people who measure worth by logos and likes, whispered about how broke he looked. One even took a photo, quietly, the flash reflecting in the window. The man heard it, looked up, and smiled faintly. Not because he was unaware, but because he remembered when he had once laughed the same way, years ago, before life had stripped him down to the truth. There was something strange about him, something that made you want to know more. His eyes, gray, quiet, unreadable, looked like they had seen every season of loss. When the waiter placed the coffee on the table, he thanked him gently, like gratitude still meant something. The group's laughter grew louder, bolder, feeding off each other's attention. One said, "Imagine living like that. Some people just give up on life." Another replied, "He probably lives in a basement somewhere." Their voices carried easily, but the man didn't flinch. He simply sipped his coffee and stared out at the rain sliding down the window pane. But if you looked closely, really looked, you'd notice a faint smile, not of embarrassment, but of recognition. He had once been them. Young, loud, proud, and blind. He knew what it felt like to mistake noise for confidence and fashion for worth. What they didn't know was that every stain on his jacket had a story, a business deal gone wrong, a betrayal survived, a fortune lost and rebuilt. His name was Daniel Hart. Once, not too long ago, his name used to appear in business magazines. The founder of a real estate firm that built half the skyline of the very city these young men lived in. But he had sold everything 5 years ago, disappeared quietly, and moved into what people assumed was a modest old house on the edge of town. In truth, it was a mansion, hidden behind oak trees, surrounded by acres of land, and filled with silence. He didn't crave noise anymore. He had outgrown applause. Imagine spending decades chasing recognition, only to discover peace in being unseen. That was Daniel's reality. He came into the cafe not for coffee, but for curiosity, to see how people treated others when they believed no one was watching. It was a test, though no one knew they were being tested. As he sat there, he overheard the boys talking about a new housing project in town. They bragged about knowing the developer behind it, though their facts were wrong, their arrogance louder than truth. Daniel smiled again, because the developer they were bragging about was him. The cafe door opened again. A gust of cold air brushed past. The laughter paused for a second. A tall man in a suit entered, carrying a silver folder. His eyes scanned the room and immediately spotted Daniel in the corner. His posture changed, respectful, almost nervous. He walked straight over, bowed his head slightly, and said, "Sir, the documents are ready. Shall I bring the car around?" The cafe went silent. The young men who had been laughing froze, realizing what they were seeing. Their jokes died in their throats. Daniel looked up slowly, finished the last sip of his coffee, and said calmly, "No need. I'll walk." He placed the cup down, stood, and nodded politely to the stunned crowd before walking out. The man in the suit followed him respectfully, holding an umbrella open over Daniel's head. From outside the window, the group watched as the stranger in old clothes stepped into a black Rolls-Royce Phantom, the kind of car you only see in movies or parked outside mansions you are not allowed to enter. For a moment, no one spoke. The rain hit the glass, louder now, like the world wanted to erase their laughter. But the story doesn't end there, because what came next would leave the entire cafe and the city talking for weeks. Daniel wasn't interested in revenge. He believed people learned best from reflection, not humiliation. And so, He decided to teach them a lesson they would never forget, not through anger, but through elegance. Imagine if you could silently show your worth to those who mocked you, not to prove them wrong, but to remind them of what respect really means. That was Daniel's plan. He didn't seek confrontation. He sought understanding. But before that could happen, the past had to open its door and reveal why a man with everything chose to live like he had nothing. Because years ago, Daniel had learned that the loudest applause often comes before the biggest betrayal. That night, Daniel stood by the tall glass windows of his mansion, the same rain from earlier now washing over his estate. The house was quiet, the kind of silence money cannot buy, the kind that comes only when a man has nothing left to prove. The chandeliers above glowed softly, their golden light reflecting on marble floors that stretched into vast, empty halls. This was not the house of a man desperate to impress. It was the home of a man who had already been impressed by life and found it overrated. He walked past portraits of his parents, his late wife, and the younger version of himself, suited, smiling, confident, yet hollow. He paused for a moment in front of one particular photo, him, standing beside his business partner, Alex Reed, the man who had once been his closest friend and who later betrayed him. It was because of Alex that Daniel lost everything once. Every penny, every client, every shred of reputation. The betrayal had been brutal. Signed papers, hidden deals, and one moment of blind trust that turned a decade of work into ashes overnight. He remembered the day vividly, standing outside his own company building as security guards escorted him out, his name stripped off the glass doors he had paid for. But Daniel hadn't fought back with lawsuits or revenge. He had walked away, quietly, choosing to rebuild from the ground up. It took him 5 years. 5 years of silence, patience, and planning. And now, Alex Reed was back in town, preparing to launch his new luxury housing project, the same one those boys at the cafe had been bragging about. What they didn't know was that the land Alex was building on belonged to Daniel. Imagine that, watching someone steal from you once, then walk back into your world thinking you are gone. Daniel smiled faintly as he poured himself a glass of wine. The papers on his desk confirmed everything. Alex had no idea that Daniel had bought out the company that owned the land, quietly, through shell corporations. The project was built on borrowed time. But Daniel wasn't looking for revenge. He was looking for meaning. After years of bitterness, he wanted to do something different, something that would restore the idea of grace in a world obsessed with pride. The next morning, Daniel's assistant, the same man who had met him in the cafe, arrived with new documents. "Sir," he said carefully, "the press will announce the ownership transfer next week. Shall we go public?" Daniel shook his head. "No. Let him finish building. Let him believe it's his masterpiece." He walked out onto his balcony, the wind stirring the leaves around him. "When it's done," he continued, "invite him here. I want to show him something." The assistant hesitated. "Do you really think he deserves to see this place?" Daniel's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "This house is not for revenge," he said softly. "It's for reflection. Sometimes, people must see what peace looks like before they realize what chaos costs." 2 weeks later, Alex arrived. He came in an expensive car, wearing an even more expensive suit. He hadn't seen Daniel in years, and his face showed the mix of surprise and discomfort only guilt can cause. The mansion's gates opened slowly, revealing a driveway lined with ancient oak trees and a view of the grand estate at the end, timeless, quiet, majestic. Alex stepped out of his car, staring in disbelief. When Daniel appeared at the entrance, dressed in the same simple clothes as before, Alex almost didn't recognize him. "Daniel," he whispered. Daniel nodded, calm as ever. "Welcome." Alex looked around, confused. I didn't know you lived here." "That's the point," Daniel replied, motioning for him to follow inside. "People only see what they want to see. You of all people should understand that." Inside, the mansion felt more like a museum than a home. Art pieces, books, and quiet warmth filled the space. It didn't scream wealth, it whispered legacy. As they walked through the hall, Alex began to talk about his new project, his success, the investors lining up. He spoke as if he were convincing himself more than Daniel. When they reached the study, Daniel handed him a folder. "Before you continue," he said, "you might want to see this." Alex opened it. His face drained of color. Inside were the property deeds, Every document showing Daniel's ownership of the land his company had just built on. You bought it? Alex stammered. Daniel smiled faintly. Years ago, I let you build your dream on my foundation. I wanted to see if you would remember the man who gave you your first one. Alex looked up, shaken. So this is revenge? No, Daniel said, his tone gentle. This is forgiveness, the kind that doesn't need an audience. I wanted you to see how far silence can go when pride stops talking. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the wind through the tall windows filled the space like an echo of time itself. Then Daniel said quietly, You took everything from me once. But you also gave me something in return, the peace that comes when you stop proving and start being. Alex looked around at the mansion, the quiet strength of it, the dignity. It wasn't built to impress, it was built to endure. Daniel added, The young mock the old because they don't understand the cost of experience. But someday they will, just as you have now. He handed the folder back. Keep your project. Finish it. I don't need the money. I only wanted you to remember who helped you start. Alex's voice broke. Why are you doing this? Daniel looked at him, the faint smile still there. Because forgiveness unsettles people more than revenge ever could. That night, when Alex left, he didn't feel victorious. He felt small, not because Daniel had humiliated him, but because he hadn't. Daniel returned to his study window, the rain starting again outside. The city lights shimmered through the drops, blurred and distant. And for the first time in years, he felt free, not from pain, but from the need to prove anything. Imagine living in a world where no one needs to know you're successful for you to feel successful. That was Daniel now, invisible to the crowd, invincible to their judgment. The cafe boys would soon find out who he was, but not through gossip or headlines. Through whispers, stories, the kind that humble people quietly. Because sometimes, silence has the loudest voice. By the end of that week, the story had spread across town like wildfire. Not through headlines, not through tabloids, but through whispers that carried more weight than any public announcement ever could. Someone from the cafe had filmed the moment Daniel stepped into the Rolls-Royce, and the clip had gone viral. A silent, short video of a man in worn clothes being escorted into a car worth more than most people's houses. The comments section filled with shock, regret, and reflection. Never judge a man by his clothes. That's real class, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything. The very people who once mocked him now used his name as a symbol of humility and dignity. But Daniel didn't read the comments. He didn't even know the video existed until his assistant mentioned it. When he saw it, he just smiled faintly and said, People are learning. That's enough. Still, something inside him whispered that the story wasn't finished yet. There was one last chapter to close, one that involved the young men from that cafe. A week later, Daniel walked into the same cafe again. Same jacket, same shoes, same quiet grace. The same waiter greeted him, but this time with visible respect. The laughter that had once filled the room was gone. Whispers replaced it, respectful, curious, guilty. The young men were there too, sitting in the same corner. When they saw him, their faces froze. Daniel walked straight to their table and set his coffee cup down gently. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of them stammered, Sir, we are really sorry. We didn't know who you were. Daniel looked at them calmly. Why should you need to know who I am to treat me kindly? The words landed like stones in water, quiet, but deep. The boys lowered their eyes, ashamed. He continued softly. The problem isn't that you laughed. It's that you forgot laughter has direction. It can lift someone or it can break them. You chose the second. One of them whispered, We didn't mean harm. Daniel smiled gently. Neither did I when I dressed like this. But it harmed your perception, didn't it? There was silence again, the kind that teaches. Then Daniel reached into his pocket and placed a small card on the table. Come by this address tomorrow evening, he said. I have something to show you. He turned and left, just as quietly as he came. The next evening, curiosity and guilt brought the young men to the gates of his mansion. When the iron gates opened, their jaws dropped. The same man they had mocked now stood on marble steps, surrounded by gardens and lights that looked like something out of a film. But there was no arrogance in his posture, only calm welcome. He invited them in, offered them tea, and led them through the grand halls. The boys looked around in awe, whispering to each other, struggling to find words. Daniel stopped in the main hall, where a large painting hung above the fireplace. It was of a small house, Old, crooked, humble. That, he said, was my first home. It leaked when it rained. I used to sit under that roof dreaming of a life better than it. One of the boys asked quietly, "So, this mansion is your dream come true?" Daniel shook his head. "No. This is the result of losing that dream once and rebuilding it with different eyes. I thought money would buy me peace, but peace came only when I stopped caring who noticed." He walked to the window, gazing out at the reflection of lights over the pond. "I dressed poorly that day for a reason," he said. "I wanted to remind myself what it feels like to be unseen. I wanted to see if the world had changed, if kindness was still free." He turned to them. "It isn't, but it can be." One of the boys spoke up, voice trembling slightly. We understand now. We judged you by what we saw." Daniel nodded. "And now you see that what you saw wasn't real. Most people hide their emptiness behind polished shoes. The trick isn't to look rich, it's to live rich. Rich in thought, rich in kindness." They listened silently, humbled, their arrogance stripped away. Before they left, Daniel said one final thing. "You will forget my name one day. But remember this: never laugh at someone's struggle. You might be laughing at your future teacher." As they drove away, one of the boys looked back through the window of the car and saw Daniel standing on the porch, hands behind his back, watching the sunset. The golden light fell across his worn jacket, making it glow like something far more valuable than silk or gold. And in that moment, it hit them: they hadn't just met a rich man. They had met a man who had conquered himself. Daniel went back inside, poured himself another cup of coffee, and sat by the same window as always. The rain began again, soft and steady, as if the sky was washing away the last traces of mockery from the world outside. He didn't check social media. He didn't need validation. The true mansion was already built, not from bricks or marble, but from grace, forgiveness, and silence. That night, he wrote a short note and placed it on his desk. "When they laugh, let them. One day, silence will speak louder." He smiled, turned off the lights, and walked toward the quiet warmth of the hall. The laughter that once echoed through the café now lived only in memory, replaced by a deeper echo, one of respect. And so, the man they once mocked became the story they would tell for years, not for the wealth he had, but for the wisdom he carried. Because in a world obsessed with showing off, Daniel Hart showed them what true richness looked like, the kind you can't see, but you can feel.